Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Alia Marrero Alatar. I'm a sophomore at the college studying government and history and literature, and I'm a member of the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on Park Street and JFK Street. In the event of an emergency, please congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones. And now, join me in welcoming Harvard College undergrad Jackson Deutsch.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the JFK Junior Forum. My name is Jackson Deutsch, and I'm a freshman at the college planning on studying social studies and economics. It's my privilege to welcome our esteemed guest tonight, former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, for an ever-pressing discussion on the state of immigration policy in the United States and the lessons learned from his time at the DHS. Secretary Mayorkas served as the 7th U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security from 2021 to 2024 under President Biden, and after being the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama from 2013 to 2016. Mayorkas was born in Havana, Cuba, but fled to Florida after the Cuban Revolution. He would later move to California and graduate from UC Berkeley in 1981. He earned his law degree from LMU and joined the Obama administration in 2009 under the DOJ's criminal division. During his time at DHS, Secretary Mayorkas has played a significant role in the implementation of key immigration policy under both the Obama and Biden administrations. He spearheaded DACA, led efforts to rescue orphan children from Haiti, and was involved in the counterterrorism and anti-cybercrime efforts. There's perhaps nobody more accomplished and knowledgeable about U.S. Homeland Security than the Secretary. It is a privilege to have him with us here today. Our moderator tonight is Juliette Kayyem, a Belfer senior lecturer in international security. Ms. Kayyem served as Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security in President Obama's admin, as well as Homeland Security Advisor to Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. She's also a former Harvard graduate, earning her bachelor's degree from the college in 1991 and as a JD from Harvard Law School in 1995. Finally, we would like to welcome our special guest tonight, state and local economic development professionals from throughout the century who are here as part of the Tallman Center's Economic Development Community of Practice, which they are co-hosting with the Reimagining the Economy Initiative. Now, please welcome me in joining Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and Professor Juliette Kayyem.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and I think you've got the introduction so far. So I'm going to begin by thanking you. This is your first public event since leaving office, and you've done a bunch of events here. We have known each other a long time, and I am really grateful for your willingness to speak here. And we're here to discuss really tough issues, controversial ones, the future of Homeland Security, and the department itself. And so I also thank the audience in advance for your understanding and receptivity to opening and fostering a discussion. Okay, before we dig in, this is called the softball I've known you a long time question.
I was hoping they'd all be.
No, it gets worse. It's just like I'm getting you, you may not view it as a softball, but I'm joking. Look, you were impeached by the House for dereliction of duty. You became the focus for an issue that is beyond controversy, that President Trump utilized to try to convince people that what you were doing was inadequate. Much of what you put into place, or at least discussions of it, are now being untethered, whether it's temporary protective status or the very successful CBP-1 app. And yet every day you went in. And I want to begin in this time to ask you, what does public service mean to you, given what you also personally went through, in particular, an impeachment hearing?
Thank you, Juliette, and thank you all. I need to take a step back and explain why I entered into public service. My father and mother brought my sister and me to this country, escaping the communist takeover of Cuba. I come from very modest means. My father did not have very much in Cuba, but whatever he did have, he lost. It was the second time in my mother's life that she was a refugee. The first time was her flight from the Holocaust, in which she lost a tremendous amount of family. They instilled in me a profound sense of patriotism and gratitude for this country, and I developed early on a desire to be in public service. The impeachment proceedings were difficult, but three things were tremendous sources of strength and inspiration. One is tremendously proud to be a part of the administration of President Biden and Vice President Harris. Two, tremendously proud to work alongside and support incredible public servants in the Department of Homeland Security. And three, when one has 100% confidence in the integrity of one's decision-making, one can deal with the politics much more readily.
Okay, so we're going to cover a lot of Homeland Security issues, but we need to begin with the border, of course. And I want to, for those who don't follow sort of the intricacies of immigration issues, there's really two issues at play. That's the encounters at the border and then the deportations in the homeland. So I want to start with the encounters because some numbers came out yesterday. And Trump last night in his congressional address said, "Our friends in the media insisted we needed new legislation to secure the border. It turned out all we needed was a new president." According to data so far, in January, Border Patrol recorded some 29,000 encounters, down from 47,000. And the February numbers are looking to be even lower, maybe as low as when they started counting. Okay, so that's just basically the numbers that we have right now. How do you perceive these numbers and the narrative that is clearly going to be said about them?
Well, first of all, we in the Biden-Harris administration drove the number of individuals encountered at our southern border down dramatically. In June of 2024, the president issued a proclamation. We implemented it very rapidly. That created a significant drop in the number of encounters to, frankly, a level that had not been seen since at least 2019, if not earlier. So there is no question that this administration, the administration of President Trump, has promulgated policies and implemented operations that have driven the numbers down even more. There are concerns that have been expressed, and those concerns have been carried into the courtroom through litigation, that the numbers are being drawn down at the expense of our asylum laws. There's something very, very important to articulate, that at the very same time that we successfully drove the numbers down subsequent to June 2024, we also have built lawful, safe, orderly pathways for people to reach the United States and have their claims of persecution, their claims of asylum heard in court. And so we upheld our nation's identity as one of laws as well as one of immigrants. And I do think that both can coexist, and I think that we built a model for both of those to coexist in the future.
So when you talk about this shift in 2024 in the approach by the Biden administration, basically there's policies from 2021 to 2023, then a push for comprehensive or some bipartisan legislation that then essentially doesn't happen for a variety of reasons, and then the pivot or change in June 2024. There's a lot of reasons why people come to this country, right? I mean, and people study this, across decades, the push-pull of why, basically their risk calculation, what they know, what they understand would be available here. Do we have jobs? Do they have jobs? All sorts of migration patterns that really can't be influenced by U.S. policy. But there is an argument that at least from June 2024 on, what President Biden did was proof that policy could change the migrant flows. You can have your opinions about whether that's good or bad, but that it did have a deterrent effect. Now looking back at it, could that have been done earlier? Or did you need conditions to be ready for it in June of 2024?
So let's be clear that President Biden issued his proclamation. We implemented pursuant to a regulation that we promulgated. That was attacked in court, and the litigation was not resolved by the end of our administration. And so it was subject to legal challenge. The actions that President Trump has taken are also subject to legal challenge. So when we speak of the need for legislation, we speak of a solution that is actually an enduring one, where Congress has acted, has changed the law, has fixed what everyone agrees is a fundamentally broken system, and it actually is not subject to legal challenge. So while solutions can be delivered, they can be tenuous if they are delivered administratively, and we need an enduring solution. Our country deserves it. The American people deserve it. What's very important, Juliette, and I cannot overemphasize this enough, that we have to stay true to our values. One of our proudest traditions as a country is to be a country of refuge. I am a beneficiary of that tradition. I would expect that many in this room are either directly or their ancestry is. And I think that's a value proposition. And what President Biden demonstrated and what Vice President Harris demonstrated is that we can both be a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants, that we can adhere to our values while securing our border. Our policy was criticized as being restrictive at our border. But I would look at it in the context of the realities of migration. Those realities in 2024, in 2025, are very different than what they were in 2015, 2005, and so on.
So, I mean, you're not a politician, but you work in the most political space imaginable, right? Immigration, border, all the issues that get played out in politics. So that story, the narrative of what happened and over the course of the Biden administration was a story that had problems. I think it's fair to say it's sort of getting out, right? In other words, it was either manipulated or altered. And I ask you this not because why didn't you guys speak well or have the right, I ask you because what does the American public want to hear? I mean, in other words, what is the story that might be receptive, not so that Democrats win, but so that we can begin to come to a consensus? Or, just in our political space, are Democrats doomed to never be able to tell that story?
Well, I will not say that we are doomed to never tell that story. We lost the narrative.
Yes.
I think that is very fair to say. The American people deserve two things. Number one, they deserve to hear the truth. Number two, they deserve their leaders to work together to deliver solutions that the American people deserve, rather than to use a challenge as a political cudgel for electoral benefit. That is not good government. And I've spoken about this publicly before, when one has a governor of one state who is purposefully not communicating, coordinating, or cooperating with fellow governors of other states, and actually using vulnerable migrants as pawns to sow discord in the states of reception and change the narrative nationally, that is not, to me, an example of governance. That is an example of bad politics. Good politics align with good governance.
And then I have to ask you about that narrative question, since you said we lost the narrative. What could that narrative have been? I mean, honestly, because I think people who are in the center of this very contentious debate, the swinging back and forth between open borders and family, family separation, there's got to be a narrative in between. And how can it be better captured?
Well, look, we did communicate the elements of the solution that the American public deserved and continues to deserve. And it is captured by the fact that President Biden, on his very first day of office, delivered to Congress a proposed piece of legislation. Everyone agrees the immigration system is fundamentally broken. The reality is that what we saw at the border was a broken system in action, because we adhered to the laws of asylum relief, and what we saw is an asylum system that doesn't work to meet the modern day challenge of an unprecedented level of human displacement, the greatest level of human displacement since World War II.
So I want to ask now about the deportation side, which is getting a lot of play now. But despite what people say, what the president says or what his immigration advisors say, there haven't been tremendous changes in the numbers on deportation. Why do you think that is? And how did you work? You just mentioned one governor. You didn't mention him by name, but I think we all know who it is. But how do you work with governors and mayors? How did you think about it to coordinate interior enforcement issues, which are difficult?
Well, we deported. The terminology now is removal.
Yes.
We removed or returned more individuals in 1 year than in any fiscal year, I think, since 2010. Yeah. So our numbers were very high. Some would consider that something to champion. Others would consider that something to condemn. And that is an introduction to the challenge of migration policy. Interior enforcement, what we did, and I issued enforcement priorities on September 30th of 2021 that prioritized for apprehension and removal individuals who posed a public safety or national security risk. Safety and security is our predominant focus, as you well know. Juliette and I worked together in Department of Homeland Security in the Obama-Biden administration. And so when the current administration speaks of prioritizing public safety concerns, I would argue that that is the status quo ante. To make the numbers that they seek to make, they will need to expand the aperture to address the apprehension and removal of individuals who do not pose a risk to public safety, and there are examples of that. They do intend to increase the numbers dramatically. President Trump has spoken quite clearly and powerfully about that. To operationalize that takes resources and time. One needs more agents and officers. One needs more detention facilities. One needs more transportation facilities, both in the interior of the United States, and also more flights, more airplanes to actually effect the removal. One also has to work with the other countries to receive individuals.
Today,
it takes time.
Yeah, and today several mayors testified before Congress. If you were advising, because there seems to be a theme here, mayors in blue cities in blue states, right? So that is where these big removal programs will occur. If you were advising these mayors about how to deal with a federal, public, broad, not limited to criminals, enforcement action, what would you say to them right now?
Well, let me take a step back. Sanctuary cities.
Yes.
It is a term that is used rather loosely as a one-size. I think there's an impression that it's a one-size-fits-all. One sanctuary city equals another sanctuary city. That is not true. There are variances in how a city is a sanctuary city and what that means in a particular jurisdiction. I would present the following. A city has an individual who is undocumented, who does not have a lawful basis to remain in the United States. A leader of that city has that individual in their custody in the criminal justice system. That individual I'm going to give you a hypothetical, has a profile that presents what we all can agree is a public safety concern.
Yeah.
And as a federal prosecutor, 12 years as a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted individuals about whom there would be no disagreement. Repeated violent felonies. Why, after that individual's criminal justice sentence is served, why would a city leader release that individual onto the streets and refuse to cooperate with immigration authorities? It is something that I fought as the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. It's something that, as the Secretary, I worked around.
Yeah.
Because I think it is irresponsible to release that individual and not turn that individual over to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That individual, by the way, in Los Angeles, would not terrorize Rodeo Drive.
Yeah.
That individual
Right.
would most likely terrorize the immigrant community. And I think it is the responsible thing to do to turn that individual over, to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to cooperate with the federal authorities. We start getting into other different questions if the profile of the individual is different, the circumstances is different, and I would go case by case. But when it comes to public safety threats, I think it is the obligation of a governing authority to cooperate with law enforcement.
Okay, we are going to move on. Sort of rejecting sanctuary cities is, I don't want to say it's a headline, but that's a narrative that is important for people to hear, that you can be fair, but also enforcement.
I think it's a responsibility to protect the safety of one's residents. Now, do I think that immigration authorities should go into doctors' offices to pick up someone who is unlawfully present in the United States but does not pose a public safety threat? What does that do to parents? Because the reality is we have millions and millions and millions of individuals undocumented in this country by reason of a system that has been broken for more than 25 years. When you go into doctors' offices, you chill loving parents' willingness to send their sick children for medical care. And so there are different situations.
Secretary Mayorkas was talking about shifts in enforcement actions. They generally did not go to schools and places of worship and hospitals, and that has been waived now. Okay, last question then is very quick. So you've had so much time to reflect. What, if anything, as you look at your tenure in this issue, and there's just a focus on it for the department, it's much bigger than this issue, and we're going to spend 15 minutes on those, is what, if anything, would you want to have done differently or had the Biden administration do differently as regards not just enforcement, but even migration flows?
Juliette, I am not someone who, I believe firmly that the front windshield is bigger than the rear view mirror for a reason. I tend to look forward and push forward. I am very proud of what we did do. I would have liked to have wrestled with the question of communication and narration some more, but we spent a lot of time on it. It's a very difficult landscape. Traditional media is not as powerful as it once was, and how to use social media and the way people consume data. I would have also liked to have taken on more forcefully the decline in empiricism. Facts actually matter.
They still do. Okay, so I want to ask you about the department itself. Project 2025 recommends either the end of DHS or FEMA. There is talk by the Trump administration of ending FEMA, all sorts of tinkering.
Yeah.
But from another view, a lot of people are very nervous about the potential that the department, once created to protect Americans from the terror threat after 9/11, could turn against its own citizens for not agreeing or for rejecting an opinion or just being public and out on the streets, given our First Amendment rights. Are there checks in place that you're confident in that would be able to curb that internally? And is that a fear that's just sort of, not likely to happen? Or do you worry about that now too, knowing the department and its structure?
So that fear exists. I think that fear is stoked.
Yeah.
The Department of Homeland Security is rare in that it has a statutorily created Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and an Office of Privacy. We have safeguards in place to ensure that security is achieved and the rights of individuals, including the right of free speech, the right of assembly, are protected. When you speak of the threat of dismantling the Department of Homeland Security, that would be a tragedy. The threats have evolved since 9/11. I think the Department of Homeland Security is more fit for purpose now than it ever has been before. And the unification of these different agencies, 8 operational agencies, from the Secret Service to FEMA to Coast Guard, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and so on, I think that unification actually meets the diversity of the challenges that our country faces more than it ever has.
And one of those challenges remains terrorism, both the international and domestic threat. Well before, over the last 8, 12, 16 years, there's been a rise in both the international terrorist threat, but also the domestic one. So I want to start with the first, which is changes in Syria, social media, unrest could lead to foreign terrorist threat. How did you, as you were leaving, perceive that threat? And how did you perceive it as compared to domestic terror?
So the threat level when we left was heightened, and we spoke of that publicly, not just I, but also the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, the then director of the FBI, Christopher Wray. And it is because of the fact that the threat of foreign terrorism is a persistent one and actually became even more acute with the developments in Syria.
Yes.
And quite frankly, following the October 7th terrorist attacks against Israel and what ensued as a result. Number one, the threat of foreign terrorism. Two, the threat of what we call domestic violent extremism, the individual already resident in the United States, radicalized to violence by a foreign terrorist ideology, by anti-government sentiments, by ideologies of hate, false narratives. And then third, the rise in aggression by adverse nation states, Russia, People's Republic of China, Iran, North Korea, most predominantly. Iran and its persistent efforts to avenge the assassination of Soleimani. China and its cyber attacks and Salt Typhoon, the hacking of our telecommunications. Russia and the idea of detonating a device on cargo planes to retaliate against us for our support of Ukraine. So yeah, that's a trifecta.
Yeah.
And to measure one against the other in terms of gravity is a very difficult thing to do, but the fact that they are all contemporaneous speaks of a heightened threat environment.
The heightened threat environment increases when violence or the threat of violence enters the political arena, which is something that you and the FBI and others have been documenting in terms of threats against public officials. You obviously...
Words matter.
Yeah, words matter, specifically. But so do actions. The release of the January 6th insurrectionists, all of them, not just the ones who found themselves at the wrong place at the wrong time. An honest assessment is the domestic terror threat or violence in the political arena, how is it impacted by that? How do you think about that? Whether it was the right or wrong thing to do, just how do you think about what that means?
Well, I think that a number of the individuals who either pled guilty
it's a hint.
to criminal offenses, in other words, they presented to a federal court under Rule 11, if I remember correctly, of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, a factual basis underlying their plea of guilty to an offense, or if they were convicted at trial by a jury of their peers. Yeah. I think many of them may feel emboldened by the pardons. But independent of the January 6th defendants, the online platforms are both a matchstick and kerosene in the domestic violent extremist arena.
In our last few minutes, well, it is true, words matter, and you certainly lived through that. Another sacrifice that one makes when they become a public servant. There's so much the department does. I can't get to everything. I would like to get to cybersecurity. A friend of mine, when I was interviewing him, I said, ask him if it's safe to fly. I said, that's FAA, not TSA, but still, is it? No, I'm joking. So I want to end with the thing that I think a lot of students really think a lot about, and that's Mother Nature and climate disasters. FEMA plays an important role, apolitical, the question of politics being inserted into disaster relief has now been raised with sort of this conditions-based. Would we give money to help this community based on conditions? But before we even get there, right, in terms of the climate disasters that we are going to face, there's a lot of debate about how we do disaster management As secretary, what would you have wanted to change if there were no politics, if you could start all over, given that you were just seeing how many billion-dollar disasters do you know?
So the severity and frequency of extreme weather events is increasing so frighteningly. I have to tell you, I visited Mayfield, Kentucky, twice, once with the president. It is a community in Kentucky that was struck by a tornado of unprecedented strength and duration. And there was a candle factory in Mayfield that had a safe room, because it's tornado country. It had a safe room where people during, when a tornado was predicted or looming, would huddle in the safe room. It was built to keep those individuals safe. That safe room was decimated in this tornado. The building codes of yesterday are not built for the extreme weather events of today. On disaster management, an apolitical subject, because search and rescue personnel, and you know this firsthand, Juliette, search and rescue personnel do not risk their own lives and extend a helping hand in flooding waters, and before pulling somebody out, ask, what is your party affiliation? They risk their lives to save. Where I think we need to study is long-term recovery. One thing is search and rescue, then is response and recovery. And long-term recovery is within the remit of FEMA to an extent, not exclusively, but it is one of FEMA's remits, and that was the subject of discussion in our administration, and I think it continues. It needs to continue, because you take a look at the fires that ravaged Hawaii. Rebuilding housing in Hawaii is an incredibly complicated undertaking. You're talking about a tourist destination. The market is sui generis there, and long-term recovery is something that I think is worthy of further study.
We have much in common, including being from Los Angeles, which is a good thing, but it also suffered terribly this year. So I want to end with that question, with sort of long-term recovery in a place like LA. How should they be thinking about it, right, in terms of what it looks like? And it was your last disaster. I mean, I think the fires were probably still ongoing as the transition occurred. What was that like? I mean, those, in terms of your hometown, the fires, your Secretary of Homeland Security, and then you're not.
So very difficult to see my hometown suffering so acutely. I was in close touch with the incoming secretary throughout the fires. What I worry about with respect to the efforts in Los Angeles is the federation of recovery efforts. There have been a number of organizations that have been stood up to rebuild Los Angeles, and I do believe in unity of effort and cohesion. And when one has disparate efforts working in parallel, I don't think that one is maximizing impact.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to open it up to questions. I have 4 microphones here. The lights are strong, so forgive me, but the basic rules are, please introduce yourself and your affiliation here, and ask a shortish question if you can. I'm going to start here.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Liv. I'm a sophomore at the college, and my mom's family actually fled communist Chile, so it's really, really nice to get to meet you. I was wondering, my grandfather is like the most patriotic person I know. Do you feel like your identity as an immigrant makes you a better suited for this job or gives you like a special love for the country?
I have a profound love for the country. I don't know that it makes me better, but I certainly carry my identity and a sensitivity to what that meant and continues to mean. It impacts the way I view issues of humanity and the vulnerability of individuals, the fragility of life, and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit.
Hello, my name is Victor. I'm a senior at the college studying government and ethnicity, migration, and rights. And so I've taken a profound focus in immigration policy, and specifically I'm interested in how it relates to our democracy here in the United States. And so I was actually quite concerned when you led a high-profile delegation or high-level delegation to El Salvador during the unconstitutional second inauguration of President Bukele. And so I was wondering if you could explain a bit about what the process was behind that decision about going there to represent the United States when dealing with someone who actively calls himself a dictator, because I know that one of the main components of that trip was to discuss migration policy.
We felt it important to deal with a leader in our hemisphere whose domestic policies have significant impacts on our country. And I think it is very important to have those dialogues. We as a delegation came with actually a varied agenda. I was focused in my communications with the president. I was focused on migration issues and the El Salvadorian diaspora in the United States. Some of my colleagues carried forward a message with respect to the state of exception that President Bukele had imposed. I want to share something because governing is very difficult. And to govern effectively, I think that, this is my opinion, that one has to take one's idealism and merge it with pragmatism. As I mentioned to a group of individuals that had half that formula, the idealism part of migration from El Salvador historically has been extraordinary. And the per capita murder rate in El Salvador led the world, a position of leadership that no country would want. President Bukele imposed a state of exception, which is a term that is used to describe his suspension of due process, not entirely, but a lot. His suspension of due process and his incarceration of 75,000 or so known or suspected gang members. The United States took issue with the state of exception because of its encroachment upon due process and our constitutional principles.
On the right.
President Bukele, pardon me.
No, go ahead.
President Bukele, at the time of his inauguration, had an approval rate of over 90%. The only thing more popular than President Bukele was the state of exception. The per capita murder rate in El Salvador had plummeted, as had the level of migration. In fact, the El Salvadorian diaspora in the United States began to return to El Salvador. I am not defending the state of exception. I'm going to abstain from opining on it, but I just want to say that things can be more complicated than they seem. And it also impressed me, I mean that in a neutral way, I had to take stock of the fact that I historically have always viewed economic despair as the primary driver of migration, and seeing the before and after of the state of exception, I actually raised the question whether safety and security is. And so governing requires partnership. It does not mean that one's partner is always one with whom one agrees on everything or on anything, but sometimes dialogue is absolutely critical.
Thank you. There.
It's a long answer, sorry.
That's good. That's okay.
Hello, thank you for speaking with us tonight. My name is Bibi. I'm a second-year public policy student here at the Kennedy School. So last night, Trump reiterated that migrant influxes have strained cities, which we started talking about earlier, and this is definitely true. Just here in Massachusetts, we've been in a state of emergency since early 2023 for the overflow of emergency assistance shelter. So the city and its localities are definitely strained. And for my capstone project here, I'm working with a local resettlement agency that wants to serve everyone. They want to serve refugees, TPS, CHNV, humanitarian parolees in general. And my question is, understanding that it's going to be very hard to change the statute around temporary statuses, especially now, and that therefore refugees and asylum seekers are positioned for permanent residence, entitled to social benefits, whereas temporary folks are temporary by nature of the law. At the very least, are there any avenues for the federal government, DHS, USCIS, to better prepare and equip cities like Boston to deal with non-refugee immigrant flows? Because I'll just repeat what I heard in a conversation today with my client, which was that if only we knew who was coming, we would be able to plan. It's so much about planning for refugees. There's a long process to notify the responsible local agents to help before they arrive. And so how can we adapt what works about the refugee resettlement process for temporary for temporary status or humanitarian migrants that have less time to prepare, but so that we overwhelm cities less?
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
That
was
a long question.
So you spoke of different subpopulations, temporary protected status, individuals encountered at the border who intend to make asylum claims, Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, Venezuelan parolees. They have different eligibility opportunities for work authorization and relief. It was vitally important that a receiving city understand who is in the city and what those avenues of eligibility are, and therefore what the opportunities for relief are. The question to pose, and it harkens back to what I spoke of one governor, the question to pose is what would have happened in the service of the national interest if that governor had actually, in the context of the National Governors Association, gotten together around the table with fellow governors and said, you know what, our hemisphere, including the United States, is experiencing an historic level of migration. We're not alone. What can we do if we work together in the service of the national interest? And what can we do with other countries in a unified effort to address an issue of hemispheric challenge? Wow, I wish that that had occurred.
Thank you so much for coming. My name is Roy Schwarz-Tichon. I'm second year MPP. Kind of building on your last answer, I wanted to ask you, how do you see the numbers of refugees annually in the world currently? And in an ideal scenario, which can you know which person is actually a refugee or asylum seeker and which not? What percentage or criteria in terms of number should the US accept?
So let's take refugees, because a refugee is pursuant to a system that is quite well architected. Well, in need of reform, but it's firmly built. Asylum is people arriving here in the United States and then making a claim. Let me say this: refugees to the United States undergo the most intense screening and vetting of any individuals. Number one. Number two, every year, the Secretary of State and either the Secretary of Homeland Security or the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, after the President has made a determination, they consult with Congress and communicate the President's intent of the number of refugees that will be admitted in the next year. And so it is a year-by-year determination. We admitted 100,000 refugees, a very significant number, in the service of a proud tradition of being a country of refuge and a country of laws. And so it is an annual determination according to capacity. It requires an ecosystem. I believe, if the news is accurate, that refugee admissions have been halted. Refugee stipends for those who already have arrived have been halted, creating a great deal of instability.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Secretary Mayorkas, wonderful to see you again.
Nice to see you.
My name is Michelle Klein. I am here at Harvard now as a fellow with the Advanced Leadership Initiative, and I retired at the end of August after 25 years with the UN's Migration Agency, and my last posting was as Regional Director for Central and North America and the Caribbean, which is how we met. My question goes to something that both of you spoke about at the very beginning, which is the narrative and the importance of maintaining a narrative or capturing a narrative. And there's no question that the narrative has shifted in a very, to my mind, very unhealthy way. I'm here in this leadership program to try to move the needle on that narrative, because I firmly believe that we're not going to be able to have space for making rational migration policy if we have this demonization and weaponization of migration that we're seeing right now. And I believe that that does not serve the interests of the United States to have no ability to have a rational debate about these questions, and recognize that, yes, there are strains on cities, recognize that there are also benefits in terms of workforce, in terms of innovation, in terms of performing jobs that either Americans are not qualified to perform or are not willing to perform, but we can't get to any of that in a rational way while the narrative is so bad. My question, and it's actually to both of you, is what do you see as the most effective way to try to move the needle on that narrative? Where is the entry point for that? Because facts don't do it alone. And we have plenty of studies that show the benefits of migration, show some of the negatives also, but facts alone are not enough. What do you see, both of you, from your vantage points, as the most effective levers to try to bring the temperature down so that there can be a rational debate?
I was hoping the better communicator would answer that question. Facts do matter. They alone may not carry the day, especially in a world where the importance of empiricism, as I referenced earlier, seems to be diminishing. Experience is a powerful instructor as well. And if food is not reaching our table because those who pick the crops have been removed. And by the way, because also others are not there to fill those jobs, maybe that will move the needle too. If Los Angeles seeks to rebuild from the devastating, ravaging fires, and there are individuals who are not there to hammer new roofs, and those jobs, and they may not be replaced, that would be instructive as well.
I think about the narrative a lot and being purposeful. I think when you ask what does the public want on this issue, I think they want order. And I think the left no more wants family separation than the right likes looking at caravans and figuring out how we get an orderly process. We'll take disclosing the numbers, putting them in perspective, but also understanding that every nation has the right to enforce their borders.
Secretary Mayorkas, thank you very much for your service. Thank you very much for your service, which I had the great honor and pleasure to see up front. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to have one up here. Maybe we could do two more. Yes.
Hi, my name's Trey. I'm a freshman at the college. First of all, sir, I'd like to thank you so much for coming here to speak with us. As an immigrant who escaped poverty myself, I really feel that I owe my livelihood to the institutions that you work to uphold in your 4 years in office. So that's very appreciated. That being said, my question is not about immigration. My question is about the impeachment that you went through. I was wondering, given that from what my understanding of the situation was, you made choices that were controversial, albeit very justifiable under the law. Do you believe that there is now and going forward there will be an inherent sort of devaluation of the impeachment process for a sitting president or a secretary like yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, I believe that somebody has threatened to impeach a judge that issued a ruling adverse to the administration.
Yes.
And so my experience, I would respectfully submit, is evidence of the use of the impeachment authority for political purpose rather than its legal intent.
And the last question.
Hi, thank you so much. My name's Bernadette. I'm a third-year PhD student here in sociology. I've been incredibly saddened and filled with pain to see how much terror immigrant communities are in, and often feel powerless to do anything. I'm a second-generation immigrant from Mexico. And I was wondering, from your perspective in government, what do you think is the most powerful thing ordinary citizens can do to try to support efforts to implement just, humane immigration policies and to protect communities during this time? I feel like I need some kind of direction to put my efforts toward, and I know a lot of people in my life who need the same.
That's a nice question.
It's a very profound question. One can use one's voice. One can devote one's energy to organizations who advance causes in which one believes. And very importantly, and not least, one can vote.
And on that note, it was a lovely question. So I think we have to end it. I apologize. I don't know. I'm going to look at the leadership. Okay? Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Do you hear me? Okay, thank you so much. I'm Natalia Vivas. I'm from Venezuela. I'm doing my master's in public health. I just wanted to thank you for being here and sharing your story. I benefited from the TPS when I escaped the communist dictatorship of Nicolás Maduro 2 years ago. My dad is a political prisoner and a victim of torture, so thank you for that. That allowed me protection when I needed it, and that allowed me to be here in Harvard asking you right now this question. And my question is that, so decisions made by the new US administration this last month have increased the magnitude of the challenge for Venezuelans. The TPS was revoked, putting thousands at risk of deportation back to hands of a regime that is being investigated for crimes against humanity by the ICC. Further, Trump's team has resumed meetings with Maduro in Caracas, despite the previous administration, Biden's administration, set up a reward for his capture of $25 million, such as Osama bin Laden back in the day. On top of that, the sudden dismantling of USAID has severely halted the work of most of the civil society organizations, both inside and outside the country, potentially leading us into a very vulnerable position. So my question is, how can we make sense of this, as you are the one who extended TPS for Venezuelans before leaving, because there is a documented and funded fear for us to return, and what can we do about this? Thank you.
The current administration's decision to rescind temporary protected status for Venezuelans is being challenged in the court. I don't know, quite frankly, what else one can do in response to it. The courts are the place to test the legality of actions with which one disagrees. I don't know of any other recourse. It is creating a great deal of uncertainty in populations that have understood the precariousness of their presence in the United States, but nevertheless have felt comfortable, given the history of TPS, with their presence. And I think we're in a different place right now. I wish I had a more comforting answer to provide.
Secretary Mayorkas, I want to thank you for your time today, your honesty, your reflections, and your service. Most importantly, your service. It was wonderful. So thank you all for being here.